When are we going to talk about door opening etiquette? I mean, seriously, people. I come from a small town, and normally, when you hold the door open for someone, you smile at them, they smile at you, they say thank you, usually. They say thank you, you're nice, it's a good time, everybody's day is blessed because of it. Not always, but mostly. Then I come up here and I hold the door open for people. And they look at me. They're like, "What's your aim here, partner?" I'm like they have that look. Like, "What are you trying to get out of me?" I'm like, "No, I'm just holding the door open for you." But here's the thing that really bothers me. It's not when people say, or sorry, it's not that when people say, or when they don't say thank you. So that doesn't bother me if I hold the door open for someone, they're on their phone, they don't even acknowledge it, they just walk by. Yeah, kind of. Okay, it hurts a little bit, but that doesn't really bother me. Okay, I just go about my day. This is what bothers me. When I am opening the door for someone and I'm holding it open for them, I'm clearly making an effort to hold the door open for them out of courtesy. And they walk up and they put their hand on the door. They open it wider, okay? And they push it against me, sometimes crushing my feet, injuring me. I mean, they might as well just give me the finger. Like honestly, that's basically what you're doing. You're giving me the finger. How dare you? Yeah, that happened to me one time. Well, it happens many times, but this one time I remember I held the door open for this person, and I clearly gave them enough space. Clearly, okay? This person pressed it really hard, like just like 5-degree angle more open, and I'm like, really? Like, was that necessary? That's what I'm thinking. And it struck me. I was like, "Oh, shoot." Like I said that. I was like, "Oh, shoot." And then they turn around and they look at me and they say, "Oh, sorry." And I looked them square in the eye and I said, to quote Jesus, "Get behind me, Satan." That's how I feel about it, okay? Let's recognize how to treat people when they open the door for you, okay? All right, everyone. Getting into a pretty cool topic today. We're getting away from the cultural stuff, getting into more apologetic stuff. But before I start, I just want to urge you to subscribe and to follow if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Make sure you follow the podcast. I don't want to be posting it all over my social media every single time, like bothering everyone, because then they're gonna unfollow me, and then I won't have friends, but that won't really change. Anyways, subscribe, follow, so that way you can keep listening, get frequent updates. Also, if you have a Twitter, follow me at Resurgency PDCST. That's at Resurgency PDCST. And I give updates, real quick updates. In fact, I tell you when the next episode's coming out, usually tell you about what the topic is coming out. So that's where the exclusive stuff is, and it's the best way to reach out to me. You can DM me on Twitter or you can tweet at me. Like I said, as most of the people watching this, you probably know me, so if you do have a question or a comment, you can just reach out to me through a personal way. I'm totally cool with that. But yeah, if you have a Twitter, if you don't have a Twitter, congrats. I mean, it's kind of a cesspool of horrible humanity, but if you have it, go ahead and follow me. And yeah, that's the best way to reach out to me. Okay, so let's begin. I actually want to start today. I'm kind of excited because I want to start this thing where we talk a little bit about apologetics in ways that aren't necessarily talked about. I want to, or this topic that I'm talking about is actually going to be more of an open-ended question. It's not so much that I have a proposition and this is what I believe. It's more so, hey, here's an idea, here's a thought I had, what do you think? So that means I really want to hear from you. Okay? So let's get into it. So what we're talking about today is the reliability of the Gospels, the reliability of the authorship, and how can we know that we trust the words in the Bible and whatnot. Or, sorry, more specifically the Gospels, okay? The other stuff is kind of different. But yeah, so I think it's a legitimate question. Authorship, dating the Bible, those are all legitimate questions. And now I won't get too technical in it, but I just want to pose a small facet of the argument for the reliability of the Gospels. That being said, let's get into it. Now, what I hear from a lot of secular scholars, skeptical biblical scholars, I think that's what they're called, which, I mean, if I'm being honest with you, it's kind of strange. Like, how do you devote your career to disproving the Bible? Like, I don't know. It's like, you can't put your efforts elsewhere. Anyways, I appreciate them because it makes Bible-affirming Christian scholars stay on their toes, so I guess there is a good place for them. But what I often hear them say is, well, they will date the authorship of the Gospels pretty late, and some of them saying that Mark wasn't written until like the mid-60s AD, late 60s AD, some like in the 70s AD, and even very conservative biblical scholars might say that Mark was written in like the late 40s AD. But from what I've seen, it's probably a best estimate that Mark is written somewhere in the mid-50s AD. I think don't necessarily quote me on that. Oh, and by the way, Mark is generally regarded as the first gospel written, if you don't know that already. And then after that, Matthew, and then Luke, and then much later, almost everyone agrees that in like the 90s, John wrote his gospel. I believe it's the 90s. Anyways, so you have these skeptical scholars saying, okay, well, the authorship of all of these gospels are really late, and Jesus died somewhere around 33 AD. And what they like to say is, I don't understand how you can get these stories, Jesus' sermons and the stories and miracles of Jesus, all recorded like decades later. And what I'll say is this. One, okay, let's say you are right in that the Gospels are written actually a lot later than what conservative biblical scholars say. Let's say let's say Mark wasn't written until like the 60s AD or early 70s AD. Let's say you're right. I don't think you are, but let's say you're right. That's when, like I said, people will they'll give kind of like the argument, oh, well, I barely remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, so how can these people remember what happened decades earlier? Obviously, I'm kind of simplifying that argument. They say it actually much more professionally, maybe. But I think it's a legitimate question. I mean, how can you get these really in-depth sermons that Jesus says, or Jesus speaks, and all of these stories? How can you get these really in-depth words compiled together decades later? That's a legitimate question, and I wonder about that. And then comes along last year. So last year, I read this book in my class, in my medieval European history class, and it's called the Táin Bo Cúailnge. It's an Irish epic poem, and here's the cool thing about it. This epic poem bits and pieces of it were written down in the 8th century AD, and then the first full compilation of it I think it was about the 12th or 13th century AD. Okay? But here's the thing. The stories that the story itself takes place in the 1st century AD in Ireland, or modern day Ireland. And I find that fascinating that this story, now it is kind of mythological, but there are a lot of elements of truth in it, and it's an oral tradition. The fact that it survived, this oral tradition this story from the 1st century AD all the way to the 8th century AD and not being fully compiled until the 12th or 13th century AD, I think that's incredible. But if you read in this story, you will find in-depth conversation. And another interesting thing that I thought was kind of similar to what you find in the Bible, more so in the Old Testament, but even a little bit in the Gospels, is you'll actually find genealogies in here, like and long ones too, like biblical genealogies. And so it gives me some confidence, like, wow, so this oral tradition was able to survive so many centuries, these in-depth conversations, these really intricate stories, and these genealogies. Even though this was, or a big portion of it was mythological, these names are real. And they kept the names in there because when they would pass these stories down, these names, or surnames and whatnot, maybe not surnames at the time, but anyways, the names you find in there, you could say like, hey, I so-and-so is related to that person in that genealogy or whatever. That was a big thing in the genealogies. It was pretty important back then too. And you say, okay, Trevor, that may be an anomaly. That may just be one little thing. But I encourage you to look up, I think if you just Google stories that came from oral tradition, you'll find a lot. And another one is something you may have heard of is the Odyssey by Homer, or I should say the Homeric poems, also the Iliad. You may have heard of the story Beowulf. I think that's how you say it, Beowulf. Yeah, that one's an oral tradition too. And a lot of these stories, they're dated back a very long time, but then it's not for another few centuries that they're written down. I will give you a full disclaimer. I'm not sure how they know that the oral tradition goes back that far, but keep in mind, for instance, with the Toyn, I learned that it was spoken in the 1st century and not written down, parts of it, until the 8th century, and that was from a very secular, this is from a secular school, Berkeley, so they're not going to give me any fantastical stuff, really. And amongst many historians, secular or not, they tend to agree on oral traditions and how far they go back. I'm not sure the method that they figure out how far they go back, but a lot of them agree on it. So that being said, you may say, Trevor, a lot of these stories are kind of medieval European, pre-medieval European. I know the Homeric poems are Greek. Yes, Greek. So you may say, that's all well and good, but maybe it was a little bit different in Israel. And maybe it was, but I did find this guy named Robert Miller, he wrote a book. It's literally called Oral Tradition in Ancient Israel. And he claims that even though literacy was higher in this region as opposed to Northern Europe, and when you think about it, it was the Roman Empire, literacy was actually a lot higher than, say, the medieval period. At least the layman, your average Joe Roman citizen walking down the street, chances are they're a little bit more literate than your average Joe 7th century in Europe, Odds are that they're more literate. So you may be thinking, well, maybe oral tradition was not that big back then, but this scholar, Robert Miller, he claims that there's actually sufficient evidence of orality in Israel. Orality is just oral tradition. But he says that written and oral literature kind of go hand in hand. And so what I kind of learned from these stories passed down by oral tradition, is that maybe now it's not so unreasonable to think that, yeah, these stories about Jesus, his sermons, his actions, they actually happened how they were recorded, and I think they were remembered pretty accurately. And I mean, think about it. A lot of these stories, they've survived through oral tradition over centuries, but then these skeptical scholars say that there's some fault in the recording process when an oral tradition may have lasted only a few decades. To me, it seems stronger than say like this book, the Toyn. You know, does that make sense? I hope it does. I realize you can't answer me as I ask you, but yeah. So, well, and another thing too, that if you really think about it, so let's say for instance Paul, he wrote on the resurrection, talking about how there's like around 500 people who saw the risen Jesus. And we know that there were so many more people who at least encountered Jesus. And I mean, he was the bee's knees. He was the guy. I mean, not among the Pharisees, of course, but everybody was flocking around to see Jesus. I mean, you read the Gospels and you see how many crowds of people are surrounding him. So there's so many people hearing his sermons, seeing his miracles, and you take these stories, or I should say these events, and you put them in a time where oral tradition is alive and well. And also the fact that there's so many people, I think it's pretty reasonable to trust that these stories are accurate, because as Paul was saying, with around 500 people seeing the risen Jesus, and then I'll go out and I'll just say it, over probably thousands of people coming into contact with him, with Jesus, hearing his sermons and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many voices out there, and a lot of collaboration, and we know that these gospel writers took the time to record or to listen to testimonies. I think that is made especially clear in the Gospel of Luke. So that's kind of my conclusion. It's a little open-ended, but even if the skeptical scholars are right that the Gospels are written much later, that does not undercut the validity of them. I hope that makes sense. And it doesn't undercut the validity of them because oral tradition was strong. And it maybe not strong, but it was active. And it was a very real thing in Israel at the time. Where it's more open-ended is maybe you as a listener know more than I do about this. Over the past month or so, I've been trying my best to look up oral tradition in ancient Israel, especially what was oral tradition like in the first century. And it's been kind of hard to find a lot, keeping in mind that this was the Roman Empire and literacy was up during that time. And yeah, it was kind of tough to find some things, but at least what I can deduce from things like the Toyn, from Beowulf, from the Odyssey, and from many other oral tradition stories, I think it's a sound conclusion to make. So if you know more, if you have heard people talk about this, if you read books about this, and maybe you based off what you've heard, you think I'm totally wrong, I want to hear from you, because I think it's a solid argument. And to be honest with you, I don't hear it very often. When skeptical scholars throw it in the face of conservative biblical scholars, say, hey, these things were written way later, how can we trust what was written? I mean, with the accuracy and with how in-depth the Gospels go, how can we trust it? I don't really hear conservative biblical scholars. That's when I say that, I mean biblical affirming Christian scholars. I don't hear them talk about oral tradition that much. I just hear them say, "Oh, well, it probably wasn't written that much later. It was probably more written, and then they say like a more of a middle of the road, like say, take for example, Mark. Probably wasn't written in the late 60s. It was probably written more in the mid 50s, early 50s, and then they give evidence for that, which on the other hand I think is good too. But I'd like to say that the oral tradition could be a way to combat that argument, to combat the argument that somehow because of how long it is from the death of Jesus to the Gospels writing, that the validity of it somehow goes out the window. So I'm hoping to hear from you. I'd like to get some feedback, especially if there's any older folks listening, people who are a little bit more learned in this area. Maybe my pastors are watching. That'd be really cool. Maybe they know some stuff about this. I'd like to hear from you. So yeah, let's talk about it. Okay, so that's it for the sort of Christian topic. I kind of like that, more apologetic. It's not so dark and dismal like cultural topic stuff. Yeah. Okay. Let's see, where are we at? 20 minutes. Okay. I think I'm just going to go right ahead to questions. Nothing really in the news right now that's sticking out to me. There's like coronavirus and, I don't know, impeachment and, I don't know, Grammys and stuff. Not much that, I just don't have much to say on it. I don't know. If you want to hear me rant about it, I guess I can do that, but I need that in writing. Okay. First question. Hold on. All right. Of course, I got to sip my water. First question. This is from DeJong, good buddy of mine. In fact, my housemate. He commented this on the first video, so sorry, DeJong, that I skipped it last time, but here it is. He said, "Great episode." Thank you. "I was wondering if you could share what it was like during and around the time you converted, including what specifically made you interested in Christianity in the first place and why others should believe that Jesus can be for everyone." Wow. Yeah, good question. You're letting me talk about myself. That makes me feel good. There's psychological data to prove that. So, what specifically made me interested in Christianity in the first place? Well, what really made me interested in Christianity was the intellectual depth of it. I mean, to say that I was shocked by the intellectual depth of Christianity, it would be an understatement. To be completely honest with you, before I was a Christian, I thought Christians were kind of stupid. I thought they were using religion just as a crutch, and I thought it just made people feel a little bit better about themselves. And then I get hit with all of the Christian philosophy, apologetics, and theology, and I'm like, whoa. And not only that, it actually makes sense of the world much better than my previous worldview. So I'll give you something for example. I was very into science, and I thought everything there is can be explained by science. There's scientific reasoning for everything. Some people may call that scientism. And I just kind of held that view. But I was pointed out by my mentor, Roy. He said, he brought up this really great point. He said, because he used to think the same thing. He said, if science is all there is, if we're just chemical bags walking around, then one, we can't trust what we actually think because it's just chemical responses. So therefore our thoughts are just slaves to the chemical reactions in our head. Two, whatever feelings of relationships we have to other people, we can't, or at least are not legitimate. sure, they feel good, and we want that, and we want to strive for something that feels good, but in the end, it's just a product of evolution, and there's no actual meaning for it. It's meaningless. And then 3, all things are permissible. If I'm just another animal from evolution, then that means morally I'm no more in the wrong for murdering someone than a lion is for murdering a gazelle, for instance. I was like, wow. Now, the conversation was much more in depth. He didn't just give me that, and then I was like, oh, wow. We talked through it, but those examples, I think, are very powerful in the fact that scientism is not good enough. And then when I came to the Christian worldview, it said, hey, yeah, you can trust your thoughts. In fact, we want you to think. And, oh, yeah, the whole relational thing that you're feeling that you want, that's a good thing too. We want you to love, and we want you to care for people. And then also the way in which God wants us to do these things is actually for our better. Because if he created us, then he knows what's best for us. Right? Does that make sense? Take, for example, I make a printer, and then it tries to, I don't know, what's something that a printer could do? The printer tries to become a shredder. Well, it's going to be a terrible shredder, But I made the printer to be a printer. And so it's going to work best when it prints. Likewise, how God made us to do things, or how God made things, if we do them how he made us for, then we're better off. And I think he's justified in knowing what's best for us because he made us. Right? And then third, yeah, there is afterlife. There is heaven. There's eternity. And we are granted those things. And, if we choose to. And given eternity, it's like, it makes most sense, because when I feel love in my heart, feel compassion, I want that to last forever. And I don't say that as a cliche. So that's kind of just an introduction on why Christianity was so appealing to me in the first place. Why others believe that Jesus can be for everyone. I mean, dude, he said it. He said it, that he's for everyone. And the New Testament affirms that. But in the end, people won't understand that Jesus is for them until that they see themselves as a sinner. Which everyone is. I think it's Romans 3. Somewhere in there, please don't rebuke me. It says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It's very clear, we all have sinned. And until someone sees that they are a sinner, they won't understand that Jesus is for them. And I guess to maybe help bless whoever's listening, there were 2 times when I really saw my sin as what it is. I was sitting down with Roy, and we were talking about Christianity. We were talking about sin. He said, Trevor, have you ever read Plato's Republic? I said, not all of it, but good chunk. He said, do you remember that ring in there? I'm like, vaguely? I don't know. I don't know if I remember that. He said, Trevor, if I gave you a ring, and as soon as you put it on, it granted you invisibility, how long would it take you after putting that ring on to start acting immorally? That silence was intentional, because that's how I felt. I was like, it'd be about 0.001 seconds. I mean, like the time that it would take for me to realize that I'm invisible, boom, I'm starting to act immorally. And I was honest with myself. It's like, and those same thoughts that are within me, that's sin. God sees all of that. And it is against God. Another time when I saw sin was when one of the pastors at my church preached through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And, man, just that incredible bar that Jesus put. He takes the law and he raises it. He said, I ain't here to make it, I ain't here to make the law easier on you guys. I'm here to show you that the law is raised and you can't meet up to it. And man, I felt that. Yeah, I'm a sinner. But thankfully, Jesus took the punishment on our behalf so that we can be restored to God. We are saved. And I encourage you, if you maybe you're seeking, maybe you're not exactly a believer in Christ yet, sit with a friend who is a Christian. I would prefer that you not do this alone. But sit with a friend who is a Christian, who gets it, who understands it, and read through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. Okay? Read through that and just ask every question you can. And hopefully that Christian that you're sitting with is loving and is willing to answer any questions that you have to the best that they can. And I can affirm by my own testimony that you will be greatly impacted by it. Now, maybe I'm putting a little bit of the cart before the horse. Maybe you are having a little bit of a hard time understanding the reliability of the Bible. Does God even exist? Does Jesus exist? Did he do what he actually did? Because if Jesus did what he actually did, then he has a legitimate claim. He says the only way to get to God in heaven is through me. That's what he said. So if he did what he said he did, we could prove that historically, which as a Christian, I know, not believe. I believe, therefore I know. Or, hold on. I know, therefore I believe, thank you, that what he did happen. So if those are your questions, then address those first. Okay, don't necessarily put the cart before the horse. All right, I hope that answered your question. From Anonymous, by the way, totally get it. Illuminati, the government. Yeah, I get it, Anonymous. That's smart. My name is Trevor Mauk, allegedly. Anonymous asks, does anything about being Christian ever feel like a chore? If yes, how do you change that mindset? Wow, what a great question. Does anything about being Christian ever feel like a chore? Wow. Not always. And it kind of comes in waves. Sometimes we get spiritually dull, at least I do. And I feel like the ways in which I'm called to serve, the ways I'm called to reach out to others, the ways I'm called to serve in the church can feel like a chore. That's when I'm feeling spiritually dull. There's something within us that we want, we have to, even in our spiritually high parts, there is kind of that thing in us that's like, oh, I need to do these things so that God knows I love him. And we can have a really long discussion, in fact, an entire episode, 2 episodes on, faith without works is dead. We can have that discussion. But I will say this, it's not the central thing. God's love is not contingent upon you doing things for him. And so when it does feel like a chore, I know that it's usually in a spiritually dull moment. But when it's not, I reflect. I reflect on the love that I have around me, and I reflect on the love that I have in my heart. I reflect on the salvation decision I made. And I reflect on what Jesus did. And I know that it's not because of anything that I do that I'm saved, or by the ministry I'm given. It's all God's plan. And some really good passages to read are take these verses, for example, Ephesians 2:8-9, fantastic verses. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. So I think it's amazing that, hey, you're saved not because of what you do. And it shows you how loving God is. It's like, hey, I'm going to do it for you. That's kind of what God says. It's because of us that he did it. But he's going to do it for us, and I hope that made sense. But if you ever really get into a serious time when you are very spiritually dull and you just for the life of you cannot get out of this funk of seeing Christian life as a chore, you may want to take a break on a church event. I would encourage, don't skip Sundays, but maybe a church event that you attend on the week only once. I would say only once, because we are called to live this Christian life together, and I believe it's much healthy to do it together. But one time, just say, hey, I need some alone time. I need some time with God. And so when you're in that funk, go back to God and really, really pray. Pray is huge. And be honest. Say, hey, God, this is how I feel. This is my problems, and I need you to make me better. I need you to help me see how you want me to see. I need you to help me feel how you want me to feel. Be honest with him, and I know he'll come through. He comes through for me. And in that alone time, here are some passages that are fantastic for this topic specifically. I mentioned Ephesians 2:8-9. That whole chapter is fantastic. Ephesians 2. Read that. And then Romans 5, Romans 8. Those are fantastic chapters. Galatians 3, also very good. And Hebrews 11. Those are fantastic passages to read and to really reflect on the idea that we are saved through faith by grace. Wait, don't rebuke me, but is it grace by faith, or we're saved by grace through faith, or saved by faith through grace? I think it's saved by faith through grace. Or saved by grace. Wow. Okay, I should. Semantics, man. I'm telling you. And then the last thing to wrap up on, in that time of reflection, open up with prayer, be honest with God, read these passages, and then reflect on them. Pray again, maybe, and then read 1 John 4. Absolutely beautiful passage. I mean, dude, this man, the Apostle John, man, just does not. This guy, man, he's a champ. Chapter 4 in 1 John is amazing, especially starting in verse 7. Really, starting there, that's fantastic. And that is a good way to help you recognize, what does this relationship with God mean, and what does it mean to live the Christian life? And spoiler alert, he paints a very simple picture. He said, man, it's love. That's what it's about. It's love. Okay, how am I doing? All right. I got one more. I'll try to make this a little bit quicker. Try not to make it an hour podcast. This is from another housemate. My housemate's really coming to represent everyone except for Anonymous. I don't know where you're from, but Everyone else in here is from Berkeley, so you guys stepped up. Like I said in the last podcast, y'all step up. So Peter, my housemate, says, how do I know if I'm spiritually healthy enough to evangelize so as to not fall into bitterness and coldness towards God? An aptly timed question, I think, Peter. How do I know when I'm spiritually healthy enough to evangelize so as to not fall into bitterness and coldness towards God? I think, a lot of what I just said. How do you know if you're spiritually healthy enough? Okay, just processing that question. Yeah, just to add what I said, maybe after you've had your break, if it's a pretty bad funk, but sometimes you just got to go for it. Just like, I don't feel like doing this. It feels like a chore. I feel like I have to do this. I don't feel like I want to do it. Sometimes just go do it. Force yourself to do it. Make other people force yourself to do it. Great example is, I remember like in high school, every now and then I'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to play in this field show. That's when the band marches on the field and we march and we do formations and we play songs. It's great. Sometimes I'd just be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. Like it feels like I have no heart in it. I don't have any love for it. And my mom would be like, no, you're going to do it. Simple. It got to the point where I knew I had to do it. And I went and did it. And then afterwards, I'm like, you know what? I kind of crushed that field show. I hit my steps, I hit my notes. And when I did it, when I didn't hit my steps, hit my notes, the rest of the band may have covered me up, hopefully. And dang it, I had a good time. Because, man, it's people who are in band. It's like, it's fun being with those people. It's fun being in that group. And, of course, this applies with anything. You'll find yourself, man, I just love hanging out with these people. And you know what? Maybe I didn't do a great job, but we were all having a good time while doing it. We all understand that each one of us messes up. And then at the end of it, you're going to be like, you know what? I feel a little bit better about it. A comment Peter had, I think loving people is very important in evangelism, but I think we should make sure to emphasize trying to help get people saved. If we focus on love, we may forget the whole point of evangelism in the first place. Yeah, so Peter is talking about, in my last podcast, which if you haven't listened to it, please do, I talked a lot about practical means of evangelism. And I put a really big emphasis on showing love to people with evangelism. And so it may have come across like, just evangelism is just loving people. And that's not how I meant it. I meant it showing love in the mind of getting people saved, because we know that deciding to follow Jesus grants them eternal life. So we should definitely have conversion, or not necessarily conversion, but establishing that relationship for them and for that person and with God in mind, because man, it's eternal life. It's so important. And if you think that it's just showing love to people, that is evangelism, then the people you're outreaching to, they're not going to get saved. Now, conversely, if you think evangelism is only converting people, what you're going to run into is getting people who, well, number one, they probably just won't even give you the time of day. And then also, I think, especially in American Christianity today, we get this whole just ask Jesus into your heart and you'll be saved. And it's like, no, that's not really it there, partner. So you just tell people, hey, just ask Jesus into your heart and you'll be saved. they don't know what that means. And then also it's kind of wrong too, what you just told them to do. And so then the relationship isn't fully restored. And are they really saved in that situation? Maybe. Maybe not. But I think if we do it with all love, with all right intent in establishing that relationship, it can be good. So yeah, I agree with you. Peter also says, some believe that we should be able to evangelize in all areas, not that we should necessarily focus on one place of evangelism, but see the areas that we're weak in as opportunities for growth. Should we focus on one or the other? Is there a balance between doing what you're good at and putting yourself out there in ways that you will grow? This is a great question. I think if you read the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament, you'll see people being called to do things that they're just not good at, or at least they didn't think they were good at it. So yeah, I think it's a great way to take on tasks that you're really weak in. So for example, I have no cooking ability or inclination. I don't really enjoy it. Microwave is fine enough for me, but as a means of serving others that I'm reaching out to, it's a good thing. It's a good skill to have, and I'm trying to get better at it. Keyword trying. Not that I am getting better. But yeah, I mean, also look at Jesus' ministry and all of the different things he did. You know, having meals with people, serving his disciples, and just the different miracles he performed and all of the different ways he addressed different people. Yeah, of course he's the Son of God, but I think just the fact that he's very versatile can provide for us a good example. Now, I do think that there is a good balance. I think, you read what I read last time, 1 Corinthians 12, about spiritual gifts. And so God has given us spiritual gifts, so I think it is a wise thing to take advantage of those things, because what better way for me and for you to advance the kingdom of God than to do it in a way that you're best at? But then also finding the balance of, hey, if we're doing an outreach event and we need another person on cooking detail, at some point I'd like to say, hey, I can do that. Or maybe you're doing doing an outreach event and you're saying, hey, look, we need more people to go out into this place to have conversations with people. And it's like, hey, I'd like to be able to think that I can go out and be more open, be more quote unquote extroverted. Even, I'm an introvert, but I can kind of force myself into extrovert. I don't know, extroversion. I don't know. But I can be able to go out and have those conversations with people. But then also, maybe I'm a super good extrovert and I just love going out and talking to different people and love reaching out and starting those conversations and just planting those seeds. I love doing that. But maybe you're horrible at having real in-depth one-on-one conversations. Maybe you're a horrible listener. It's something I need to work at. Maybe in counseling someone who's going through difficulties, maybe you just don't give great advice all the time. And those are ways for you to work at. So there's very, very much so practical things, cooking, cleaning, that serve evangelism. But then there's also things like a little bit, not so much in the practical hands-on approach, more so just kind of temperament, personality. We all have different personalities. That doesn't mean we all shouldn't be able to be adaptable, okay? So, prepare yourself. If you see a spiritual area in which you're lacking, dude, ask God to help you, and I think he will. Take it on. As Jocko Willink would say, crush it. He'd get up in the mic, watch out for your headphones. He'd be like, crush it. That's what he'd say. So get out there and crush it. But then also, I think serving in the way that we're best at is a good way to really let our passion for God, our love for God, pour out. So there's a good balance. All right. I thought this podcast was going to be like 30 minutes. It's 50. I'm so sorry. I just talk. I just talk too much. That's kind of what I'm here for. I just come here and talk and I ramble, but it's fun. It's a good time. I hope you're blessed by it. And if you're not, tell me. And then I'll go in my room and cry like a small child. Okay. All right. If you like it, share it with people. And subscribe and follow so I don't have to keep posting on social media and bothering everyone who doesn't want to listen to this. So, okay. Oh my gosh. All right. I will see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed. And again, remember, I want to hear from you, especially on the topic I talked about with oral tradition being a way to back up the authorship of the Gospels. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.